So what we're going to do today is walk through each of the steps for all 4 weeks of the curriculum carefully and slowly so that we can really start to calculate how the weeks are built and how they build up in complexity and how with each lesson we can start to carefully look at those stories more intensely and to see what they reveal. And what we want to do is build in complexity so that the body, as we're reading these gestures, we see how the body conveys more and more information. So let's start with week 1. Okay? Same, what we're going to want to do is ask participants to pair off right away. Okay. After introductions, we want to move right into the work. So for the sake of the workshop today, we'll pair off with whom we have. Okay? Ideally, we would have more people in the room. And typically this workshop can be conducted with anyone up to 16. But right now, let's pair off. Carrie, Matt, why don't you pair off together? Saint, you're going to pair off with Romeo. And what we would do is, as we traditionally start, is that I'm going to offer a prompt. Now this prompt, as it will be for every week, this prompt is always one word. Now this word can be freely interpreted. And what I'm going to ask you all to do is when I tell you the word, to think of a story, your own personal narrative that you associate with that word. Now I won't tell you the word right away. What I want you to think of first is how can you tell that story in as much detail as possible. Now, this is not just the where, when, with whom. It's everything that you can possibly recall. Who were you with? What did you say? What was around you? What colors? What time of day? What year? Anything that you can possibly recount. What's less important is the beginning, middle, and end. What's more important is that you attempt to paint a picture of that story in the listener's mind. In a traditional setting, we would pair off and one person would tell a story and then we would alternate. So that's what we're going to do now. Now the prompt for the first narrative is anxiety. Again, first story related to your own experience that comes to mind. Now that might be a singular moment in your life, or you might find that to tell a story related to the word anxiety that you have to retell an experience over the whole year, or maybe it's a whole chapter of your life. Whatever that story that comes to mind is the story that you should tell.
The goal is to paint like the moment that it was felt the most.
What I would say is pay much more attention in relating the ways that the story is connected to that prompt, and try to paint a visual image of that story in the listener's mind.
Do you want to do more so like, say, when anxiety, since the topic is anxiety, when anxiety kicked in at that moment, like the exact moment?
I think that's a great question, and yes. But also feel free to tell all the surrounding information, all the surrounding factors as well. As much as you need to tell for that story to truly connect to the word in your mind. All right? Let's go ahead and pair off, all right?
So, this was after like mad arrest. I was in Williamsburg, and I was with my friend Justin. So we were like doing graffiti around the area, and like an hour later, after we were done, we were just walking. Like I think we were closer towards Fort Greene by the time that this moment happened. So we're just chilling.
And my friend wasn't home, so mind you, the thing kept slipping out of my pants, his shorts, and it kept slipping down, so I kept having like that. And I guess people that were following me knew that. So they, when I was going back, I
So now that we've told the narratives, Saint, what we're going to want to do is ask for a volunteer listener. And in a traditional setting, you might have to do this first and offer an example. But we would like a volunteer listener to attempt to create an image that encapsulates that entire narrative that they've listened to. Now that's impossible. So what you will ask, or what I'm going to ask you all today, is to attempt to distill that story down to the most essential moment, that most important aspect of the story that you, as the listener, identify with the prompt anxiety. What frozen, silent gesture can you create that best and most clearly communicates the heart of that story? So, Carrie, I'm going to ask you, you've listened to Matt's story. I'd like to ask you to stand up and create a frozen, silent gesture. Create an image. Offer an image that you think best communicates what you listen to in association with the word anxiety. Okay, great. Can you hold this for a little while, Carrie? Okay. This is what Carrie has given us. Saint, as we're walking you through the Saint, as we're walking you through the steps, I'm going to have you stand up first and observe exactly what Carrie has offered us in connection with Matt's story. Now, what's important is that we start to interpret this by its most basic information. So, Matt, you cannot say anything as this is your narrative. But Saint, let me ask you first to start to describe for us what is it exactly that you see. Not an interpretation, what precisely is what is it precisely that the body is doing? That basic information is where we want to start. So for example, what is Carrie's arm doing?
I think he's either holding on to something or knocking.
Knocking, okay. At the very least, we know that his hand is closed, right? Let's just start there. So you're already starting to see an action, but we know that this hand is closed, and
so
we know that the arm is up.
He's probably knocking.
Right? So let's start just by describing what exactly you see. So for example, where's he looking?
Down. I don't think he's thinking.
Okay, so we know he's looking down. Now that's starting to communicate certain information to you, but we know that he's looking down. What is his chin doing? Or how's he carrying his head?
It's like he explained, it's in a downward position.
Downward position. Now what's happening here?
His hand is holding something, maybe a belt.
Okay, now that's very important because we see that the hand is open.
Yeah.
So that's already starting to lead you to believe that this is holding something. It's not flat, it's not clenched. This is very specific information, right?
It's not relaxed.
It's not relaxed either, right? So now we're moving this along. You start to see that there's anxiety in the way that he's staring down. We started to see that maybe this is a forward motion. You started to see that this, and whatever that this body gesture is telling us, might be knocking or holding, but this is active at the very least, right? Now, let's move it along even further. What possibly could this person be doing? Now, we have to think about how this might be related to the word anxiety. So it takes a little bit of an interpretation and guessing.
I'm gonna take a wild guess.
Go ahead.
But maybe like he's knocking on he's about to see someone that he doesn't want to see.
Okay.
Or like he doesn't want to run into this person, but he has to.
Okay, so seeing a knocking, and maybe this is some wariness happening in this person's face. Now, what do we think about, as you interpreted, this holding? Because I'm seeing concealment, that maybe this is meant to hide something, right? We want to really try to boil it down to the essential information, because every little piece of this gesture will tell us something that moves us closer and closer to that narrative. Let's stop there. Let's all sit down. So we saw a few interpretations, and we saw, say, how we built it from just the basic information that we can gather from simple gestures, and how that you can actually move that into interpretations that might get you close to what the actual narrative is. Now, what we want to ask, Matt, is if you would volunteer any information that you feel comfortable of your own story.
Sure. Well, in the beginning, it was night. It was 10 p.m. on the weekend, Saturday. We was on my roof, and my older brother, I was with my older brother and my younger brother, and my older brother was like flashing his gun around, and when we got back inside, he left for a while, and I was like, you know what? And he put it in my room. He put the gun he was leaving in my room, the closet. So I took it, and I was like, you know what? Go into my friend's crib. We don't need this. He's gonna go back to show anyway. So I was like, nah. So I took it, and I wasn't really thinking of what to wear. I just threw on anything I had and just left. And I put, me being a dickhead, I put shorts on. Like I put jean shorts on. So the thing in my pants is hard to like keep up. So I kept walking and I kept having to go like that, push it back up.
I see.
So I thought somebody was following me. So I came to my friend's house, and at that point he wasn't there. So that's when the anxiety kicked in. At that moment.
I see. So you are arriving at your friend's house. You're still attempting to hold the firearm up in your pants. And your friend is not there. And anxiety is starting to kick in. Why?
Because I know somebody's following me.
Because, okay, so you, at this point, it's not a guess. You know someone is following you. Okay. Now, we've heard the narrative. Before I get back to you, Matt, what did we get right, in your opinion, in interpreting the gesture?
Well, the knocking.
The knocking. So, well, Matt has not told us that he was knocking on the door. However, in hearing the narrative, we now are interpreting this even further as that maybe he's knocking on a door, right? What else did we get so accurate?
The fact that he was in a rush.
The fact that he was in a rush, that was named.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. And
And the holding
of the
right?
pants.
Right. Matt, let me bring it back. How did it feel to have someone else translate your story?
It's like hard to put into words.
Well, let me ask you maybe a simpler question. Did you think that Carrie's assessment of what was most important in connection to anxiety? Did Carrie nail that? Did Carrie get that fairly accurate?
Yeah, definitely.
Why, in your point of view?
Because just the look on his face, the downward, the holding of the concealment, and just the anxiety look in his face is like, that's exactly how I felt that day. I was just like, just.
So the expression said it for you.
Yeah.
The expression was there.
The whole composure said it for me.
The composure, the gesture communicated enough information that really was that moment where we were trying to get into your friend's house. Now, we didn't get that part. We didn't get the fact that there was someone that he was looking for. We also missed a really vital point of the story, in that he was, at this point, attempting to get away from what he knew was a threat, or yes.
I'm sorry. to go there, but that was Matthew's fault. He didn't tell me that. He told me that I think after he got away from the door, then he knew someone was actually following him.
Okay.
So I would interpret it, someone was following him.
So that
Yeah.
piece was actually missing in what you heard. And actually, in the translation of the gesture, that is exactly one of the things that we missed. The fact that there was a presence following or a threat. Now, we knew that maybe there was intentionality, that there was a purpose to the movement, to the knocking, but we didn't explicitly name that there was a threat or a presence, in this case, law enforcement, that you were anxious, that you were afraid and needing to get somewhere. We also didn't know that there was a friend on the other side of the narrative, right? That there was this friend on the other side of this knocking. But we knew just enough to understand the state of what you might be feeling at that moment. Now, Carrie kind of named it, but in hearing our interpretations and in hearing what we missed, would you tell the story any differently the next time?
Being that like we had all these corrections on it, yeah, I would definitely tell it like in a more profound way. Like add more details, add more gesture posture into it to actually when people visualize it, they already have a vague idea of what it is, what's about.
Now, Saint, why do you think we do these comparisons and try to measure accuracies between the listener's rendition and the actual story?
Well, because when a story is being told multiple times from body to body, things start getting lost. Like the reasons, the emotions, and the feeling, that all starts to kind of disappear.
And so that is why we start with just this basic information of what a body can tell us. Because in your scene, in your viewing of not only what is captured in Carrie's gesture, but on our interpretation of events, you might actually recall information that you left out. And you might actually recall and remember that you did not tell essential pieces of the narrative, a narrative that is your own, but without those details can be lost in translation, particularly if it's told by someone else.